What if everything you thought you knew about African history was wrong? Not just incomplete, but deliberately distorted. What if the stories that shaped your understanding were filtered through a lens of colonialism, bias, and outright lies? That's about to change. Imagine a world where the voices of those who lived the history are finally heard. A world where oral traditions, passed down through generations, are given the same weight as dusty colonial archives. That world is here, and it's being built one podcast episode at a time. For centuries, the narrative of Africa was controlled by outsiders. European explorers, colonial administrators, and Western scholars wrote the history books. They collected the artifacts. They interpreted the evidence. And, unsurprisingly, their interpretations often served their own interests. Think about it. How many times have you heard the phrase, "Dark Continent"? Who coined that phrase, and what did they really mean? But now, a new generation of African storytellers is taking back the microphone. They are creating podcasts that are not just entertaining, but are acts of cultural preservation and historical correction. Podcasts where the African story is told from the perspective of Africans. Take, for example, the African Narratives podcast. It's a space where you'll hear history explained and challenged by the very people who own that history. And it's not just about history. It's about folklore, too. Podcasts like African Stories on Spotify are diligently working to archive African folktales, ensuring that these vital pieces of cultural heritage don't disappear. These aren't just bedtime stories. They're windows into the values, beliefs, and worldviews of different African cultures. They are an audio time capsule. Consider the stories passed down through generations, like those featured in Stories Mother Told, African Folktales, available on platforms like Apple Podcasts and Audible. Imagine these ancient tales, once confined to villages and family gatherings, now accessible to anyone with a smartphone. But it's not all just popular storytelling. Even academic research is getting the podcast treatment. The Journal of African History podcast makes cutting-edge scholarship accessible to a wider audience. That means you no longer need a university library card to learn about the latest discoveries and debates in the field of African history. This explosion of African Story podcast isn't just a trend. It's a reflection of a deeper movement. A movement to decolonize knowledge, to reclaim cultural authority, and to ensure that African voices are finally heard on a global stage. Platforms like AfriPod are even emerging to help listeners discover these vital podcasts, building a true ecosystem of African audio storytelling. But here's a crucial question: who gets to tell these stories? A Reddit thread titled, "Any African History Podcast Made by Africans," reveals a hunger for authenticity. People want to hear from Africans themselves. They're wary of narratives that might be tainted by bias or cultural misunderstanding. This isn't just about representation, it's about ownership of the narrative. The colonial legacy continues to cast a long shadow. For centuries, African voices were silenced or marginalized. Oral traditions were dismissed as unreliable. Now, podcasts are providing a platform for those voices to be heard, for those traditions to be honored. Of course, there are challenges. Turning oral traditions into recorded episodes raises questions about translation, simplification, and the potential loss of local context. How do you capture the nuance and richness of a story that's been passed down through generations, without losing something in the translation? These podcasts connect to a much larger digital heritage movement, where oral history, languages, and folklore are being preserved in digital formats. This is about more than just entertainment. It is a conscious effort to safeguard African cultural heritage for future generations. So, what does all of this mean? It means that the way we understand African history is changing. It means that African voices are finally being amplified. And it means that you have the opportunity to learn a more complete, more nuanced, and more authentic story. Seek out podcasts like this, and challenge your own assumptions. After all, History is not just about the past, it's about who controls the narrative in the present. What stories have been lost or suppressed in your own family history? What can you do to reclaim and share them?